Today, I want to share my story with you, where God was present at all times. My name is Ahmad, and since I was a child, my life has revolved around the teachings of Islam. I was born into a devout family where faith wasn't just a practice, it was the foundation of everything. Every day, 5 times, I would kneel in prayer, reciting verses from the Quran with deep reverence. The mosque was my sanctuary, the place where I found peace and direction. My devotion to Allah and to the principles of Islam gave me a sense of purpose, and I believed that this dedication would lead me to salvation. My understanding of the world was shaped by the Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, guiding me through every question, every challenge. Though my life seemed rooted in the principles of Islam, there were moments of doubt that quietly crept in. Late at night, in the stillness of my room, I would sometimes question the nature of God and what awaited me in the afterlife. The Quran spoke of deeds being weighed on the day of judgment, but there were moments I wondered if I had done enough. What if my sins outweighed my good deeds? These thoughts would always be brief, buried by the comfort of prayer and study, but they lingered, like a shadow, just out of reach, quietly challenging the certainty that had once been my foundation. I had always respected other faiths, particularly Christianity. As a student of theology, I found it fascinating to learn about other beliefs. But when it came to Christianity, I believed it was fundamentally flawed. The idea that Jesus could be the Son of God was something I simply couldn't grasp. Jesus, I believed, was a prophet, great, revered, but just a man. The concept of the Trinity seemed incomprehensible, and the notion of salvation through grace felt like an easy escape that undermined the importance of personal responsibility. For years, I held this view with confidence, debating Christians and defending Islam with clarity. But beneath my certainty, the quiet doubts continued to stir. It was during a trip to visit my family in another city that everything began to change. The day started like any other. I woke early for Fajr prayer, recited my usual supplications, and spent the morning discussing theology with my younger brother. As the afternoon wore on, I began to feel an unfamiliar discomfort in my chest, something I initially brushed off as nothing serious. By evening, however, the discomfort had intensified, turning into a sharp, stabbing pain that made it difficult to breathe. "Ahmad, we're going to the hospital," my brother said firmly, grabbing his keys. I protested, as I usually did when it came to medical matters. "It's probably just indigestion," I insisted. "I'll be fine." But the pain didn't ease. By the time we reached the emergency room, I could barely stand. The doctors quickly assessed me and ran several tests, their expressions becoming more serious with every passing minute. Within an hour, I found myself lying on a hospital bed, hooked up to machines. They explained that I was having a severe heart attack. My mind raced at their words. How could this be happening to me? I was young, healthy, had always taken care of myself. I ate well, exercised regularly, and prayed faithfully, yet here I was, facing a heart attack. As the doctors worked to stabilize me, an overwhelming fear washed over me. I thought about my family, my life, the prayers I had yet to offer. Was this how it was going to end? Was I about to meet my Creator, unprepared and uncertain? The room began to blur. The voices of the medical staff faded into the background. My chest felt like it was being crushed, and each breath became harder to take. I closed my eyes and whispered the Shahada, clinging to the one thing I had always believed would save me. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. As darkness enveloped me, there was a moment of complete stillness. No pain, no sound, no light. Just silence. But within that silence, I felt something profound. It was as if I were on the edge of something vast, standing at the threshold of an unknown journey. I had no idea what was about to unfold, but I knew with certainty that my life was about to change forever. When I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, I was no longer in my body. It was an odd sensation, like floating but without any sense of weight. I looked down and saw myself lying in the hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. My chest rose and fell shallowly, the machines beeping erratically. My brother was standing nearby, his face pale, his eyes filled with worry. His hands gripped the edge of a chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Strangely, I didn't feel panic. Instead, I felt calm, as though I were watching a scene from a movie. I tried to speak, to call out to my brother, to tell him I was still here, but no sound came from my mouth. I wasn't even sure if I had a mouth in this form. There was no pain, but there was a strange detachment. I was tethered to a different reality, observing everything around me but unable to interact. It was then that I noticed it. A light. It wasn't blinding or harsh, but it radiated with a softness, an intensity that felt almost alive. It pulsed gently, growing brighter with each passing second, as though it were calling to me. This light wasn't coming from the hospital room. It was distant yet incredibly close, pulling me toward it with an irresistible force. I felt its presence deep within, an undeniable draw that seemed to reach into the core of whatever I had become. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Every instinct told me to resist, to stay grounded in the reality I knew, but the light had a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a visual phenomenon. It was a presence, alive and powerful. It didn't speak with words, but with a feeling so profound that I couldn't describe it. The room around me began to fade. The sounds of the monitors, the voices of the doctors, even the sight of my brother, all of it started to dissolve, replaced by a vast and encompassing brightness. I felt as though I was being pulled through a tunnel, the light growing closer and closer. At first, I tried to resist, but soon I realized it was futile. The pull was gentle yet firm, undeniable. As I moved toward the light, a sense of warmth began to wash over me, a warmth that wasn't physical, but felt deep within my soul. It was soothing, yet powerful, filling every part of me with an overwhelming sense of peace. The warmth grew stronger as the light enveloped me completely. It was no longer just something I could see, it was something I could feel, something that seemed to pulse with life. I stood in its presence, overwhelmed by its beauty and its power. It was as if I was standing in the presence of something infinitely greater than myself, something beyond comprehension. Then I saw him. At first, it was hard to make sense of what I was seeing. A figure emerged from the brilliance of the light, radiating a presence so powerful that I felt a deep sense of awe wash over me. As he stepped closer, I felt waves of love and compassion radiating from him, not just an emotion, but something far deeper, as if love itself was emanating from his being, surrounding me completely. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though the words felt small and insignificant in the face of his presence. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see straight through me, into my heart and soul. His gaze was not condemning but understanding, as though he knew everything about me and still loved me completely. "I am Jesus," he said, his voice gentle yet filled with profound authority. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Jesus. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. As a Muslim, I had always regarded Jesus as a prophet, a great and revered one, but never as the Son of God. The idea was something I had dismissed outright, something I had debated against countless times. Yet here he was, standing before me, more real than anything I had ever experienced. "That's not possible," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You're just a prophet. How can this be?" Jesus smiled, a smile filled with patience and kindness. "You have many questions, Ahmad," he said, his voice filled with compassion. and I am here to help you find the answers. I wanted to argue, to make sense of what I was seeing, but before I could say anything, the world around us began to shift. Scenes appeared in the light, vivid, full of life, as though I were being transported to another time and place. The first scene I saw was familiar. Stories from the Quran about Jesus. I saw him healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, and even raising the dead. These were miracles I had always accepted as truth, but now, seeing them with my own eyes, they carried a weight I had never fully understood. The compassion in his touch, the authority in his words, it was unlike anything I had imagined. But then the scenes began to change. I saw moments that I recognized not from the Quran, but from the Bible, moments I had dismissed before. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking to his disciples with a love that transcended human understanding. I saw him praying in the garden, his anguish palpable as he prepared to sacrifice himself. And then I saw the crucifixion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I saw the nails, the crown of thorns, the pain etched into his face. But even in that agony, there was something else. Strength. Purpose. This wasn't just suffering, it was an act of unparalleled love. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why did you do this? For you, he said simply. For all of you. His words pierced through me. My understanding of salvation had always been tied to deeds, to earning favor through actions. The idea that someone would take on the burden of humanity's sins, willingly sacrificing himself out of love, was almost too much for me to comprehend. The scenes shifted again. This time, I was shown passages from both the Quran and the Bible side by side. Jesus pointed to prophecies in the Quran that I had read countless times, but never truly understood. Passages that spoke of the Messiah, of salvation, of a light to the nations. Then he showed me their fulfillment in the Bible, how every prophecy pointed to him. How could I not see this, I asked, my heart heavy with realization. How did I miss the truth? You were searching, Ahmad, Jesus said, his voice gentle, and now you have found it. Tears began to stream down my face as the weight of his words sank in. Everything I had believed, everything I had clung to, was being turned upside down. Yet in the midst of this upheaval, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if the pieces of a puzzle I had been struggling to solve my entire life were finally falling into place. There is more to see, Jesus said, his eyes filled with compassion. Will you come with me? I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same. As Jesus extended his hand toward me, the world around us shifted once again. The light seemed to expand, enveloping everything. I felt a sudden weightlessness, as though I were being carried to a new realm. I wasn't afraid. I trusted him, even though I didn't fully understand what lay ahead. The first thing I saw was breathtaking. It was a place filled with colors more vibrant than anything I had ever known. The air itself seemed alive with peace, joy, and harmony. There was no pain, no suffering, no sadness, only love, pure and overwhelming. In the distance, I saw people of every kind, their faces glowing with a joy that seemed to come from within. They moved freely, laughing, embracing one another as though they were finally complete. This is heaven, Jesus said, his voice filled with warmth. This is what it means to be united with God. I could barely speak. The beauty of it all was almost too much to bear. It's perfect, I finally managed to say. Jesus nodded. It is the fulfillment of God's promise, but it is not earned by deeds alone. It is a gift given freely through faith. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. In my faith, everything had been about balance, good deeds outweighing bad, prayers offered at the right times, fasting observed correctly. But here, Jesus was telling me that it wasn't about earning salvation, it was about grace. Grace? I asked, my voice trembling with both confusion and hope. What do you mean? No one can earn perfection, Jesus said gently. No one can live without sin, no matter how hard they try. God's love is not something to be earned. It is something to be accepted. That is why I gave my life for you, for everyone, so that through me you could be free. His words shook the foundation of everything I had believed. My entire life had been built on striving, on doing enough to be worthy in the eyes of God. But now, in this place of perfect peace, I was being told it wasn't about being worthy. It was about trusting in Him. Before I could fully process what He was saying, the scene shifted again. The warmth and light faded, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. I felt the change immediately, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The air was thick and heavy, and in the distance I heard faint cries, anguished, desperate, and hopeless. This is hell, Jesus said, His tone sorrowful. This is separation from God. I didn't want to see it, but the vision grew clearer. I saw figures moving in the shadows, their faces contorted in pain and regret. They reached out as though searching for something, someone, but there was no answer. The sense of despair was overwhelming, piercing me to my very soul. Why? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why do they suffer like this? They chose separation, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. God's love is offered to everyone, but not everyone accepts it. Hell is not a place of God's wrath. It is the absence of His presence. It is the natural result of rejecting the gift of salvation. I couldn't look away. The suffering, the emptiness. It was more terrible than anything I had ever imagined. Yet even in the midst of that darkness, I felt a deep sense of love radiating from Jesus. It was as though His heart ached for every soul that had chosen to turn away. Do you understand now, Ahmad? He asked, his eyes meeting mine. The choices you make in life matter, not because of what you can earn, but because of the relationship you choose to have with God. Tears streamed down my face as his words sank in. I had spent my life striving, praying, fasting, doing everything I could to be good enough. But here, in the presence of Jesus, I realized that all He wanted was my heart. Ahmad, Jesus said, his voice soft but firm, will you accept my gift? Will you trust me to lead you to the Father? I hesitated, not out of doubt, but because of the weight of the moment. Everything I had ever believed, everything I had ever lived for, was being called into question. But deep down I knew the truth. I could feel it in every part of me. Yes, I said finally, my voice breaking. I trust you. And the light around us grew brighter, warmer, and I felt a sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just peace, it was freedom. Freedom from fear, from striving, from the burden of trying to earn what could only be given. There is more for you to do, Jesus said, his tone filled with purpose. You must return and share what you have seen. Return? I asked, startled. But I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you. He smiled, a smile that was both comforting and challenging. Your time here is not yet finished. There are people who need to hear your story, Ahmad. They need to know the truth. The light began to shift again, and I felt a pull, as though I were being drawn back to the world I had left behind. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. Jesus had given me a purpose, and I couldn't ignore it. As the vision of heaven and hell faded, I slowly opened my eyes to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The warmth of the divine light was replaced by the sterile, cold surroundings I had just left. My chest throbbed with pain, and the rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the air. The strong scent of antiseptic hit me, and I realized that I was back in my body, back in the world I thought I had departed. Voices surrounded me, filled with urgency and relief. "He's back!" one of the doctors said, sounding astonished. My vision was blurry, but I could make out the figures moving around me. My brother's face appeared, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and joy. "Ahmad, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. I nodded weakly, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. My mind was spinning, struggling to reconcile the profound experience I had just gone through with the reality I found myself in. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen heaven and hell, felt his love and heard his voice. Yet now I was back in this hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and family who could never understand what had just happened to me. The doctors were speaking in hurried tones, marveling at how my condition had stabilized so suddenly. "It's a miracle," one of them said, shaking his head in disbelief. "We thought we had lost him." My brother held my hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Alhamdulillah," he whispered, his voice full of gratitude and relief. "You're alive." Alive. The word felt so heavy, almost surreal. Just moments ago, or at least it felt that way, I had been in a realm beyond this world. I had seen Jesus, felt his presence, and experienced something that no one could have prepared me for. And now, here I was, in a hospital bed, surrounded by people who had no idea of what I had just gone through. For the first few hours, I couldn't speak much. My family stayed by my side, their relief evident in every glance and gesture. But inside, I was wrestling with a storm of emotions. What had just happened? How could I reconcile this with everything I had believed up until that moment? Jesus wasn't just a prophet, that much was clear. But what did that mean for me, for my faith, for my family and my community? The weight of it all felt suffocating. Late that night, when the hospital had quieted down and my family had gone home to rest, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter in my mind. The light, the love, the visions of heaven and hell and Jesus' words, they were all so vivid, so undeniable, but I couldn't shake the fear. If I spoke about this, what would happen? My family had always been devout, proud of their faith and traditions. How could I tell them that everything we believed might not be the whole truth? I closed my eyes, hoping to sleep, but instead his face appeared again, kind, loving, patient. His words echoed in my mind. "Go, Ahmad. Share the truth. I will be with you always." The thought comforted me, but it also terrified me. Over the next few days, as my body slowly recovered, my mind remained restless. I couldn't ignore what I had seen, but I also couldn't talk about it. Not yet. I needed answers, clarity, something to help me make sense of it all. One afternoon, when I was finally alone, I reached for my phone and began searching. I didn't even know where to start, but eventually I found myself reading about Jesus in ways I never had before. I read about his teachings, his miracles, his sacrifice. I read about grace, this concept that had seemed so foreign to me during our encounter, but now felt like a lifeline. And then, for the first time in my life, I opened a Bible. It felt strange, almost forbidden, but as I began to read, I couldn't stop. The words leapt off the page, resonating with everything I had experienced. It was as if the book itself was alive, speaking directly to my soul. The more I read, the more the pieces began to fit together. Passages from the Quran that had always puzzled me now made sense. Despite everything I had learned about Jesus' prophecies, I had overlooked or misunderstood them. But now everything was clear. However, with every revelation, the weight of my decision grew heavier. How could I keep this to myself forever? I had been called to share the truth, but the thought of doing so filled me with dread. How would my family react? My community? My entire identity had been built on being a devout Muslim. What would they think if I told them I had encountered Jesus and accepted him as the Son of God? One night, as I lay in bed, the burden became too much to bear. I couldn't do this alone. I needed to talk to someone I trusted, someone who might understand. My brother's face came to mind. We had always been close, and while I knew he might struggle to believe me, I also knew he loved me enough to listen. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. "Ahmad, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I need to tell you something that happened when I was gone." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What is it?" As I prepared to speak, I felt a wave of fear rise in my chest, but then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. This was just the beginning. When I finally told my brother everything, about my out-of-body experience, the light, meeting Jesus, and the vivid visions of heaven and hell, I saw the disbelief on his face. He didn't interrupt me, but his expression was filled with shock and confusion. "Ahmad," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "you've always been a man of faith, a man who seeks truth. But it's hard to believe. Are you sure it wasn't just a dream? The mind can do strange things when the body is under stress." "I thought about that," I admitted, "but this wasn't a dream. Hassan, it was more real than anything I've ever experienced. I felt his presence, I saw heaven, I saw hell, and I know what he told me is true." He looked away, struggling to process what I had said. "You're saying that everything we've believed, everything we've lived by, isn't the whole truth?" "No," I said gently. "I'm saying that the truth is bigger than we thought. Jesus isn't just a prophet. He's the Messiah. He's the way to God." Hassan shook his head, disbelief still evident on his face. "Ahmad, this could ruin you if you tell people about this. You know how they'll react." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the heaviness in my chest. "But I can't keep this to myself. I was shown the truth. Hassan, how can I stay silent?" He didn't respond right away. I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to dismiss what I was saying, to chalk it up to delirium or imagination. But another part, the part that knew me deeply, was listening, considering, and perhaps even questioning. Over the next few days, I shared my story with a few others, people I trusted, people who knew my heart. Some reacted like Hassan, with skepticism mixed with concern. Others were outright dismissive, unwilling to entertain the idea that I could have encountered Jesus. But a few listened, open-minded, curious about what I had experienced. One of those was an older man from our community, someone I had always admired for his wisdom and gentleness. When I told him my story, he didn't interrupt or argue. Instead, he said, "Ahmad, truth has a way of finding us, even when we're not looking for it. Perhaps this is God's way of opening a new path for you." His words gave me courage. If even one person could see the sincerity in my heart, maybe others would too. I knew I couldn't stop there. Jesus had called me to share the truth, and the conviction in my heart grew stronger every day. It wasn't about me, it was about him, about the message he had entrusted to me. So one evening, I stood before a small gathering of people, family, friends, and a few curious strangers. My heart pounded in my chest as I began to speak, but I felt a steadying presence, as though Jesus himself was standing beside me. "I know many of you will find this hard to believe," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "But I must tell you what happened to me when I was at the brink of death. I encountered Jesus. He showed me the truth about God, about heaven and hell, and about grace. And he called me to share this with you." The room was silent. The weight of my words hung heavily in the air. I saw a range of reactions: shock, confusion, curiosity, and even anger. But I pressed on, sharing every detail of my experience, every revelation, and every truth I had learned. When I finished, some people walked out, their faces closed off. Others stayed, their expressions thoughtful, as though they were wrestling with something deep within. A few approached me afterward, their eyes filled with questions. "Do you really believe this?" one man asked, his tone skeptical but not dismissive. "I don't just believe it," I said. "I know it. And I hope you'll seek the truth for yourself." As time went on, I began to find ways to bridge the gap between my Islamic upbringing and my newfound faith in Jesus. I spoke about the shared values of love, compassion, and devotion to God. I highlighted the prophecies and teachings in the Quran that pointed to Jesus as the Messiah, showing how the two faiths were connected in ways many had never considered. But I also made it clear that the message of Jesus went beyond religion. It was about relationship, about a personal connection with God made possible through his sacrifice. It was about grace, forgiveness, and a love that surpassed anything I had ever known. Looking back, I see how God used every part of my life, my upbringing, my doubts, even my struggles, to prepare me for this mission. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Every rejection, every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt has been overshadowed by the joy of seeing lives transformed by the truth of Jesus. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this. Seeking the truth takes courage. It means being willing to question everything you've known, to step into the unknown, and to trust that God will guide you. But I promise you this, it's worth it. If you've been touched by my story, if you've felt a stirring in your heart, I encourage you to seek Jesus. Open your heart to him, and he will meet you where you are. His love is greater than anything we can imagine, and through him you can find peace, freedom, and salvation. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask for prayer, please leave your name in the comments below. And if you're curious to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one is a testament to the power of faith, grace, and God's unending love. Before finishing, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow more stories like this. We have new videos every day with inspiring and transformative content for you. Don't miss the next video. I'll be back tomorrow, and I can't wait to share more with you. So subscribe, activate the bell, and we'll see you soon.